Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charney. This is another Shropshire church. This is the Church of St John the Baptist, Middleton Scriven. Middleton, of course, being the township in the middle, and Scriven most likely referring to a local family, although a scrivener is another word for a scribe. So it may be Middleton of the Scribes, or it may be named for a family who were originally scribes. This is a church that was almost entirely rebuilt between 1843 and 1848. There is some evidence of a 13th century building here. Certainly we know there was one. We also know that it was very largely restored and possibly quite significantly rebuilt in the latter part of the 18th century. But the 18th century building would have been regarded as well to 18th century by the time of the 1840s, and Reverend Rowley, who is also the headmaster of Bridgenorth Grammar School, which I suppose is a fairly fitting occupation for the incumbent of Middleton Scriven, teaching children to read and write. He rebuilds the church. Now, this of course leaves the question, why is a parish clergyman also the headmaster of grammar school? First of all, it is a very small parish. Secondly, grammar schools were often not very well endowed, and you ended up with a situation where you'd have a fellow who would be the headmaster of the grammar school, and he'd need something else to support him, and the charge of a little parish that didn't involve a huge amount of work was regarded as, well, that's about what we need. Things changed, of course, as the 19th century went on. It became understood, no, you need to separate out the grammar school headmaster and the clergy of the local parishes. And some of the grammar schools become the big second-tier public schools. They're not Eton and Harrow, which are already established, but you have, for example, Oakham School and in Rutland. Some of them become, and Shrewsbury School, of course, in this county. Others just become local schools. It varies enormously, depending basically on who the headmaster is and how much get up and go they've got. But we'll have a look around here. This is a building that has been reordered. It's been altered earlier on this century to make it into a flexible community space, replacing the village hall. In that sense, it's going back to the medieval tendency where the church would be the public building. And as we look around, we'll see some of how that sort of works. We start as usual at the West End, although because of the reordering, it's not very usual. The obvious thing is the pews have been taken out. There's a few not very comfortable looking chairs, but the chairs have been taken from the old village hall. Saves money, of course. Pulpit, reading desk and font all at the front, and the idea is then that this makes the back end, this can be the village hall. There's some old pictures here we can see. There's the church in 1791, before the late 18th century restoration. And there's the late 18th century restoration. And then, not too long afterwards, it's got the current restoration. The thing is that building is essentially, it's too 18th century. You want something that feels a bit more medieval. So that's what you get here. Middleton Scriven, it's a rectory, but it's a very small church. We saw the pictures, and you see the building here. There's the pulpit, which is 19th century, reading desk that goes with, and the font is a replica Norman font. It's not an actual Norman font, but it's carved to look like one. Here is the roll of honour from the school. You've got the scholarships, and then you've got the roll of honour with the military in the First World War. So you've got Captain H.W. Gibbs at the top. We've got captains, lieutenants, sergeants, corporals, privates. There's one chap who is described indeed as a sniper. I thought it was going to say sapper. No, he was a sniper. Sniper H.T. Armstrong. So you've got all these men who went on to serve, and then there's a S. James is a driver, so he's with the transport people. You've got a St George and the Dragon there, on, I say, the replica font. There's these windows, very straightforward. And you have here the memorial to trustee the late Simmons Attlee, according to his will, to the glory of God and loving memory of his beloved and only child, Helen Attlee, for 8 years an honorary missionary of the Church Mission Society in the Holy Land. So you have this missionary connection. The simple chancel arch is definitely Victorian. You've got here Private Richard Bash, 5th Battalion, King's Shropshire Light Infantry, fell in the Great War, 25th September 1915, aged 20 years. Also Private Albert E. Jones, 5th Battalion, King's Shropshire Light Infantry, died of wounds 6th December 1916, aged 9 years. So, looking west, we've got these two basically cupboard things, and big window there, John the Baptist, and that's probably the hymn book cupboard. That's what cupboards there normally are. And tiny little chancel, never been a big chancel here. The church doesn't seem to have developed a huge amount, again, because the village is rather small. Victorian altar there, Victorian rails, all from the 1840s. And then we have the crucifixion and the resurrection in the east window, so very simple. And then looking west, it's been turned into a multifunction space, which is what church naves were in the 13th century when the first church here was built. There wouldn't have been any pews in the 13th century. They didn't have pews in the 13th century. They come in the 14th, and they're really just open back benches. And it's only then, of course, the Victorians really were into their pews, but here, although they didn't call them pews, some of the high Victorians, they said only box pews are pews. That's another matter entirely. So that's the inside of this very, very simple building, been reordered, and a flexible space on the inside as basically the village hall as well as the church. It's becoming more and more common these days for obvious reasons, like money. And so here we are outside at Middleton Scriven. The nave retains some medieval work of the 13th century, but the chancel is entirely Victorian. The little bell turret that we saw in the Health painting has been replaced with this little bellcot thing, and it remains a tiny, simple building. And it reflects, of course, how small the population of the parish was. Not the size, not the number of people served, but the actual population here was very, very small. Not the size served, but the population. Lots and lots of land, but very few people. So we'll have a look around the outside. So here we are. Even though this is a 13th century church originally, it's still that two-cell Norman form. The difference would be the windows, and all the windows here have been in fact replaced in the 19th century. The chancel, and in these cases we have this reordering. They take out all the pews and they make the nave into a flexible space. You'll have the chancel be kept as the chancel. As we go around the outside, we have here again this, you see the difference between the stonework and the corners of the chancel versus the nave, and it's an immediate clue that they're of different dates, and the nave is much rougher, which means much more likely to be medieval. Got two bells, a ding and a dong, and just your Victorian lancet windows. The church has been slightly extended in order to accommodate and to deal with the new bell on the end. You've got a blocked north doorway here. North doorways are normally blocked. Basically, unless you're using it to go in and out through, it's just a draft, and it doesn't let any light in, so why not? So this here, the west end has been extended here, and there we are down the north side. But the church has been retained. Basically what you have, of course, with the village hall is you've got a building to be maintained, you've got a church, a building to be maintained. Well, if you can merge the two, then you only have one building and not two that need to be maintained. And there we have the porch. Again, this is Victorian addition. You can just see peeping out behind it what remains of the window that was above the late 18th century church door, and obviously that's been blocked now that this porch has been inserted and this new Victorian door put in. So that's the outside here at Middleton Scriven. So there you have it, the church of St John the Baptist, Middleton Scriven, this tiny little medieval church that has then been never enlarged but has been rebuilt at least twice. It's an interesting building, its own little way, very simple, very plain, and again it's an example of how churches are being altered at the moment to deal with changing times. Well, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you until next time.